The Auburn Tigers have fallen to the Texas A&M Aggies in their first SEC contest on the road by the score of 27-10. This is our post-game reaction show where we're going to talk about it. It becomes a little bit of a therapy session in situations like this. Obviously, we're going to break down the stats a little bit and just to get our feels out to start off SEC play for the Auburn Tigers. War Eagle Auburn family, War Eagle E2C Network family, thank you so much for joining us, whether you're watching live, whether you're watching on the replay. We appreciate you being here, hanging out with us, spending some time being a part of our little family within the Auburn family. For this particular live stream, what we have on tap for you is the case after every single Auburn game. On the away games, we get to do it a little bit quicker after it. I know for a game like this, it's probably not the best thing in the world. Seeing as how feelings are very raw right now. But we will be giving our post-game reaction and commentary on this. We won't be diving into a lot of the hardcore inside and outs of it. We will look at some of the stats. But this is just about discussing what we saw, what we think we saw, what we know we saw, and obviously trying to put a little context around what has happened. So that is what is on tap for you today. What I would really love for you to do in the stream right now, especially if you're watching live, if you're on the replay, you can do this too. Make sure you smash the like button if you think we've earned that, if you enjoy our type of content. It does help us continue to grow our little family within the Auburn family. And as always, if you can, post where you're watching from right now. We want to know where you're checking in from, and with a War Eagle preferably. That would be great. I know it's not a great time to be posting War Eagle right now, but it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger regardless of the scenario. But much rather be that than anything else in the world. So with that being said, I will kind of open this up a little bit and then we'll get some commentary on the board. A couple of things I'm already kind of seeing in the chat that I want to kind of put the preface it out there. First of all, I just saw a giant comment post up there. Not going to be able to show that on screen. So if you're wanting your comments brought up on screen, you're going to need to keep it kind of short. Can't read novels live on the air, but I appreciate the thoroughness some of you are posting right now. Also, I would also encourage you all with this. If you want your comments brought up on the screen, it's important to be constructive in your criticism and not overly dramatic for effect on social media. That is my biggest advice to all of you now. Now, there are some really legitimate, raw frustrations that need to be discussed and expressed about what we just saw from the Auburn Tigers. They were up against a very formidable situation and in some ways a formidable opponent. Texas A&M obviously puts the wood by the end of it to Auburn 27-10, not what we were all anticipating would happen. I think it was probably 50-50 split amongst the Auburn faithful. Some would tell you felt pretty confident about the game. Some would tell you didn't feel confident at all. I was one of those that felt, kind of neutral about it with a slight favor towards Texas A&M. My final score prediction was 26-20 with Auburn mounting a ferocious comeback. Fortunately, that did not happen. Although for a second there, it kind of looked like we might get something going with Robbie Ashford. But as is the case today, I should say, the offensive line was very much exposed. And I say that with all the love and compassion that I can for them. But we have to obviously talk about the reality of the situation. There was not a perfect game by anyone or any stretch of the imagination. But if we want to get down to the fine nitty-gritty of things, the quarterbacks were under duress. The running game had some moments, maybe a little bit better at times throughout the game. But really the pass protecting against the pass rush of Texas A&M did not withstand the test today. Will that be the indication for the rest of the season? I don't know. I don't think it's fair to jump to conclusions on that today. But what we know right now is that Auburn has still got a long way to go in its quest to rebounding back up to prominence within college football and the SEC. And it's not going to get much easier. Just the reality of the situation. So with that being and I will say this too, I keep having to preface these things, and I know it makes some of you mad that I have to say these things because you feel like it's directed at you. But there are offensive linemen, family members, and friends that watch these streams. And so if you're posting things that are just things you wouldn't say to their face, you're not going to get addressed at all here on the show. So keep that in mind if you want to be addressed. With that, I see a lot of fine people checking in with us. I see Neil. I'm not going to be able to get everybody acknowledged on here. I see Neil, Corey, Jay, where it's Kevlar, Eric. I think I said Tyler already. Kevin, good to see you. Thank you guys so much for checking in. I see a lot of you posting where you're watching from today. Efficient Gaming, good to see you. Thanks for hanging out with us. I would like to bring this up really quick and give kind of kudos, because I think it's important when we're talking about the game is to not just focus on what we did or didn't do wrong, but obviously what the factor was of the other team in this game as well. Texas A&M faced their own little adversity, having their starting quarterback go down. I keep saying Wigman. It's because the way it's spelled. And you would think that would give them a little bit of reason to doubt. I forgot that Max Johnson was their backup quarterback who transferred over from LSU. Boy, did he have quite the game to come in. So if your backup quarterback is Max Johnson, who by all, in no way is an outstanding, quarterback, talking about Heisman level type of stuff, but he's not a bad quarterback. If that's your backup that you got to fall back on, I feel pretty good about Texas A&M's quarterback situation right now. Obviously comes in and has a great game, so hats off to him, Texas A&M. I will say this, though, as just some overall commentary about the Aggies team and offense. Based on what we saw from Auburn in this game, I would have expected them to have blown us out a little bit more, which is really interesting. You'll see some commentary, and I've seen it from some Aggie fans about this game would be a lot different if it wasn't called back. Well, the touchdown earlier, the pick up and run it back to the end zone. Well, it was, because it wasn't a legitimate play to run back. So we can talk about that all you want, but I was surprised that Texas A&M didn't run away even further. So I still have some questions about Texas A&M, Jimbo being able to pull these things together, especially against an Auburn team that clearly has a lot to work on right now. So I see a lot of you still checking in, hanging out with us. Appreciate you being here. WT getting in here. Jimbo should have been flattened by Eugene. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. We do need to talk about the good things of this game, and one of them continues to be Eugene Asante. Picks up a fumble, which was a fumble, and runs it back. I guess he caught the fumble in the air. And Jimbo Fisher is out on the sideline in the way. And from the way the replay showed, didn't really make a move to get out of the way. Is this, Texas A&M fans are going to interpret whatever they want out of this, say you're just being petty at this point. But, if the SEC office doesn't address that this week, they're not doing their job. That's a dangerous play, a dangerous situation. I don't understand why a coach who from, tens of yards off doesn't make a move to at least go out to the middle of the field. If you're already on the field, you're not supposed to be, but to go back. But interesting play there. But hats off to Eugene Asante for giving the Tigers a little bit of hope, just a little bit of hope. But obviously not a lot on offense to the 13th man. Well played so far. Comment of the stream, Eric. He was the 13th man. That is good stuff. WT says, the sky is not falling. This is what happens when a high-level SEC team plays. We are just outmanned on the field. What WT is getting at is a lot of the context that I think some of you are missing in this game. First of all, the sky is not falling because this is the beginning of the season still. First SEC play team. We were wondering what this would show us about this team. Well, it showed us a lot that we didn't necessarily want to know, but now we know, and you know what to expect going forward. So when we talk about previews and predictions for the next couple of games, it'll give you a lot of context to think about and talk about those games. Does it make things a little bit more sobering, a little bit more frustrating, maybe for the stretch that they're about to go through? Of course, I'm frustrated about it too. But this is just the beginning of a season still, and a lot of time to address issues. The other context that's missing in this is the amount of injuries that Auburn has and continues to sustain, especially on its defense. The defense looked like the unit that was going to be able to carry this team this year, and you can be as talented as you want to be. But at some point, the water comes over the dam. I said that backwards. And today, I think a lot of the young talent got really, really tested against a high-caliber Texas A&M team and pushed to their limits. Still had some great moments, gave the offense opportunities to respond, and they did not. They did not. Everything's in front of us in the SEC. A lot of conference games left. I get what you're saying there, Cody, and I appreciate the optimism, but I also want to kind of counter, because I think sometimes people see me countering the negativity that comes on some of these streams, especially, and don't hear me talk about the flip side of it. I think it's a very sobering day today where you look at it and you don't necessarily need to count Auburn out of anything yet. Just one loss. But we can kind of walk that out from what we know about this team thus far. I talked about this preseason. I talked about it leading up to this point, back when we were in week 1, 2, and 3. Texas A&M would give you the benchmark for where this team is at, and this team is still not ready. Is that mainly because of some injuries? That plays into it a lot. But the offensive line, unfortunately, today is yet again what we're discussing that faltered a lot. And no, I haven't seen anybody prominently saying this yet, but if you're someone that says, fire the offensive line coach today, it's such an ignorant comment. It's not even worth addressing. And there, I addressed it anyway. Let's see. Defense played their butts off. I still think they're a good defense. It's the offense that is hurting us right now. Yeah, a lot of commentary early on about Peyton Thorne and his ineffectiveness today, especially after a great game last week. I would still continue to argue the point that it's hard to look even halfway decent when you have zero protection, and especially in the passing game. We kind of knew that it was going to be tough to establish a consistent running game against this team, but we thought we would be able to be a little bit more effective in the passing game, and that just not was the case tonight. Total yards for Auburn tonight, I haven't even looked at it until this exact moment. 200 yards. Texas A&M 402, doubling us up, more than double the score, kind of falls right in line there. 56 pass yards for Auburn, 144 for Auburn on the rush game. Something else I'm noticing here, 10 penalties for 64 yards. I thought it was a lot more penalties than that. Injuries, penalties, and poor decision-making at time really affected Auburn in this game. And you can't do those things on the road. You just can't. It'll get you beat every single time. Fishing Gaming says, I'm not sure why people are so mad. It's the first year. Even Saban lost to ULM in their first year. I have no problem with people being frustrated. I'm frustrated. You should have seen me in the living room there. We have a family with us right now where I am, and was watching it with them, and they were like, "You've just given up, Kyle?" I was like, "Well, I'm not giving up, but I'm just looking at what y'all are seeing right here." And I'm like, there's just, for this particular game, this situation on the road, a miracle is going to have to happen. And I'm not sure we're the point where miracles can make a difference in this game. Not a context for the rest of the season. What you see a lot of times here on the chat like this, on social media, is people just wanting a reaction. So they'll say things that they would never say in person to someone on the team, the coach, or things like that. It's just everybody wants a reaction. We were looking okay in the first half. Too many 3-and-outs in the second. Adjustments by Texas A&M. Injuries. What was the reasoning? Probably a combination of all of that. I was going to confirm that Unbeaten Lake. It's crazy to think we didn't turn the ball over today. Technically, Texas A&M fans will tell you we did. Shows you they're not willing to be reasonable and understand that was a forward pass. But we did not turn the ball over today. And that is one of the things that we discussed you could not do on the road at Kyle Field. Check that box. None of the others were checked. Now, in fairness, I want to give some shout outs. We talked about Eugene Asante. We talked about, I haven't talked about this, Alec McPherson today, knocking down a long 53-yard field goal. Obviously couldn't have even been in the game without him. You never want to have to give the game ball to someone of this particular position, but our punter, Oscar Chapman literally put his team on his back for a second there and somehow turned a disaster into an okay situation and then continued to punt well. And then I'll even give a, at the end of the game there, Larry Nixon runs down someone on a breakaway explosive play for Texas A&M, not quitting when you absolutely could have quit. So, yes, Fishing Gaming points out the O-line and D-line are main concerns for Freeze and has been pointing that out, and you're seeing that he was telling you the truth. It's a benchmark for us as fans. These coaches, I think, knew the situation that they probably were walking into, didn't think it would be this bad, but now we as fans know the context. And I think that, so a lot of you we've got this yin and the yang going on. It happens after a loss like this. You got fans that just want to throw hissy fits on social media and here and act that way. And some of it, I understand. I have those feelings right here too. But then there's the other side where it's, we got to you can't just say everything's going to be fine. So you got to be realistic and understand what's going on with the situation. I had a point there I was going to go, and I kind of lost that train of thought at this point. So maybe it'll come back to me in a little bit. Let's see here. There are a lot of injuries, 5 stars all over the field. Auburn had to play a perfect game to have a chance to win. Perfection is not possible on a first year. Well, I guess it wouldn't be perfection. I would say 2023 would disagree with you there a little bit. But I don't think they had to be perfect. I just think that they have very little wiggle room. And you did a great job of not turning the ball over. Did a good job of trying to get something going in the running game. Not enough. But the passing game not being existent. That was the killer right there. And let's be honest here too. Even as bad as some of the pass protection was, some of the decisions by Thorne, or I'm struggling to think of maybe like 1 or 2 bad throws by Robbie. Maybe just one was overthrown. Sometimes the ball hit the receivers in the hands and they didn't make the play. So it's not just the quarterback's fault. It's not just the offensive line's fault. It's not just the wide receiver's fault. It's a holistic problem that has been Auburn's issue for definitely 3 years, or 2 years and 4 games now, but offensive line play for quite some time. Not writing them off, though. I believe they can get better and will get better. It's just frustrating right now. Jabbar says, changes are coming after this game. We looked terrible. Well, I'm sure, obviously, you can't do things exactly the same. I don't know what those changes will be. Does that mean quarterback, all that stuff? I think someone said earlier that you would prefer we stopped switching quarterbacks out. I had no problems in this game of the switch from Peyton Thorne to Robbie, and maybe even back again too. But I mean, maybe I would prefer not to do that. To me, that was less of a benching, and that was more of a benching. I mean, is like you're done for the foreseeable future. That means kind of like when Bo had his bad game against Georgia State. You're not getting it done. We got to do something different. We saw we were not protecting the quarterback, and Peyton, even though he has shown much more mobility than we thought he had, he's no Robbie Ashford. And so if you're going to give yourself the best opportunity to succeed on offense, you've got to have a quarterback that is able to be a little bit slippery, more slippery than Peyton Thorne, and Robbie is that. So I had no problem with him bringing Robbie in to give maybe a spark, maybe an opportunity to counter what Texas A&M was doing. Too little, too late, maybe, just not enough. I think this is a very winnable game in a lot of cases, and which goes back to my point with why Texas A&M even allowed us to stay in this game. Texas A&M fans, I know they're happy right now, and they should be. Know from our conversations with Robert this week and others, they're breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief right now because they were walking on eggshells in this one. I think they were all ready to jump down Jimbo's throat if he found a way to lose this one. Bati, workhorse, absolutely showed a little bit of intrigue for him. 8 attempts, 59 yards, a long of 24. A couple of times, if he doesn't get hit on the shoestrings, he's probably going for much longer. Jarquez doesn't have a terrible day. 9 attempts for 53 yards for a 5.9 average. Sean Jackson had that great run at the end. So happy, actually, that he let him come into the game. And I know it's garbage time, but still comes in there and busts off a 31-yard run. You can see why he will get opportunities. Have we heard an update on Damari? I have not personally. We heard any update on him and his injury? Jeremiah Cobb only 1 attempt on the day. So there's your rushing attack, 144. Not where it needs to be by Auburn standards, but at least they were able to do some things. How many holding calls did we get? And false starts. Yeah, I think basically all of them were offensive penalties. Seems like there's always one to negate anything good we did. Very much a case today of you move 1 step forward, 2 step backs, which is why you'd see Auburn end up at like the 25, and then before the series was over with, they'd be back at the 50 out of field goal range. Ugh. Using his multiple accounts, or the group of y'all using your multiple accounts, I see. We need our defense to get healthy. I completely agree with that. Stan says that Thorne is not the guy. Not the guy. Don't know that I agree with that, but I can understand why you'd feel that way after this game. He did not have a great showing. As I pointed out earlier, a lot of that is not his fault. A lot of that is not Robbie's fault. Not going to really throw Holden into that category because he came in limited time. He did have 7 attempts for 2 for 7, 8 yards, but that was really just letting him kind of come in and sling it around. Next week will be a big recruiting game. Hopefully we get some interest. I think the interest is still going to be there. Regardless of how this game went, it's going to be a big matchup. I had been holding out hope that if Auburn could have somehow gotten this win, we would be undefeated still coming into Georgia. College game day probably would have selected us even over that Ole Miss LSU matchup. But not going to be the case now, which takes a little bit of pressure off the team in some ways to perform on such a big stage. Right now, you kind of know what you're working with. Go out, improve, get better. Plenty of time to do that. Everybody wrote a 2013 team off after that LSU loss, which did not look good really for most of the game. And lo and behold, what happened? As much as I've been a Gus apologist, I will agree with you this. It does seem ever since that Herb hand hire, it's been downhill from there. It really has. Now teams know how to beat us. You have to bring the whole playbook out now. Again, what I want to stress with you guys is a lot of you are making big overarching statements about this team, good and bad, that don't necessarily hold a lot of water 4 games into the year. Now, when we get about halfway through the season and patterns build, this is not a pattern. This is a first SEC game on the road. Then you can start saying things like people know how to beat us every single time. This is the first game against the SEC against an enormously good pass rush. They warned us. They warned us that their pass defense was susceptible. We just couldn't get the ball out there. You can't take advantage of their weakness if you can't even get to that weakness. And that's what really happened today. Let's see. If the passing game goes south, it negatively affects the running game. Sure, absolutely. Absolutely, it does. Feels like 100 sacks today. Let's take a look and see if we can figure out how many sacks it was. Sack. Wait a minute, that was a little bit different. I want to try to find that for you guys. Let's look at the home team. Total sacks on the day, only 5. Only 5 total sacks. I would agree with you guys that it felt like much more than that. Not a good look in any stretch of the imagination today. I've kind of talked about the quarterbacks a little bit already. There's really not much to write about or talk about there. Not a good day at all for Peyton Thorne. For Robbie, it's in terms of being an overall quarterback today, there's not much to judge him on outside of what he was allowed to do. Only 4 receivers got into the stat book. Shane Hooks with 3 for 18 yards. Rivaldo Fairweather with 3 for 5 yards. Brian Battie, 2 for 23 yards. And Jay Fair with 1 reception for 10 yards. Brian Battie, I had predicted, I think, for him to be my potential leading receiver for the Auburn Tigers. And he was not in receptions, but in yardage. I was just not hoping it was going to be that bad of a receiving game, but he does end up being the leading receiver on that day. That's funny. It's funny. WT. The shining light of this team is that the D is ranked 4th in the SEC. You're talking about Auburn. Yeah, look, if this team doesn't have the injuries that it has, there's no telling how high they would have been as a defense right now, which is really intriguing to see that a team where you have an offensive-minded head coach, that their defense has been the strongest point of the team thus far, even with some injuries. It's very, 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 very intriguing for me as an Auburn Tiger fan. And cue everybody is saying, yeah, I thought Hugh was an offensive-minded coach. That's the most overused line that I've heard. I mean, just to be honest with you, that's not a shot at anybody that's used it thus far. It's just, it's getting old and tired. One game is not an indication that someone's not a great offensive-minded coach. It's a lot of context missing from that. So I would say that I am discouraged by what I've seen thus far out of the offense, but mainly the offensive line. And I hope it's not an indication of what's going to continue the rest of the season. But given the nature of what we've been through as Auburn fans over the last 4-5 years, that's not a good feeling. Not a good feeling. Another question I've seen pop up, Jay, is maybe Hugh Freeze should do the play calling. So I question everybody, what do you think that's going to solve? Because this has been 4 games with Philip Montgomery at the helm. You can be a great play caller all you want, but if you can't block, if you're using your best blockers and they still can't block properly, it doesn't matter what plays you draw up. It just doesn't. I mean, I think that's the biggest frustration for Auburn fans is it seems like there's multiple solutions to this problem, but it's just as simple as that. Football is a very simple game when you cut it down to the core. You win the line of scrimmage, you win the game, or at least you give yourself a great opportunity to win the game. Auburn did not do that today at all. Thorne has to trust his arm and his receivers. The commentators were saying guys were open. Well, the commentators can say anything they want to say and say that. In fact, I remember one particular play where he said the guy was open, and then he ignored a defender that was literally coming on screen and would have stepped into the path of the pass to intercept it. So it's very easy for us as fans, for commentators to sit back and say, oh, he was open. But you don't know what the quarterback can and can't see, especially when he's got hands in his face from offensive linemen that have not given him a lot of protection. So, frankly, I know it's frustrating to a lot of you guys. I'm not happy with Peyton Thorne's performance, but I'm also very understanding of the situation. It's hard to trust your receivers and trust your arm when you don't have time to even build that trust. So, there is that. All right, let's look at a few other stats. Keep your comments and questions coming. I know the comments have slowed down because I've given a lot of you negative Nancy's out there something to think about. Not something to think about like I had better points, but I know it's fun when I'm not fun when I'm shooting it down a little bit. Just trying to bring the temperature of the room down slightly. A couple other stats in the game. We talked about receiving. We talked about passing. We talked about rushing. 9 punts on the day for Oscar Chapman. Do you guys remember in our preview show where I said if we could get less than 5 punts, I'd feel good about the situation? Almost double that. Not a good situation at all. Very happy to see Alec McPherson in a pressure situation knock down a 53-yard kick. Very, very good to see that. We fielded the ball much better on punt returns, although we only got 2 opportunities. And I continue to wait for us to be able to bust one of those special teams plays out. Your leading tackler today, again, Eugene Asante. 9 tackles, 7 were solo. Followed up by Larry Nixon, Marcus Harris, Donovan Kaufman, Messiah Nasili Kite, Zion Puckett. I think Zion Puckett was injured and got back into the game. And so on and so forth there. So Eugene Asante has another great game. He clearly is one of those diamond in the roughs on this team that you have to have to get the season right back on track here. And he's now added a scoop and score, or it wouldn't be a scoop and score because it didn't fall on the ground. I don't know what you would call it. What did they rule it as? Let's see. Make sure that, because it's not a forced fumble, so it'd be a fumble recovery. It was a very interesting situation. Stan says he threw over open receivers. Again, Stan, you're forgetting that I would overthrow people too if I'm not having the support that I need from my offensive line. My perfect example, a lot of you are talking about the Oregon-Colorado game right now. Remember how negative so many people were about Bo Nix, overthrowing receivers, underthrowing receivers, and yet he looks like a Heisman Trophy candidate when he goes to Oregon, when he gets some support. It's as simple as that, folks. It's frustrating. It's not getting better, it seems like, but it's as simple as that. It's so easy to place blame completely on the quarterbacks, and in some ways, there's some merit to that. But it's not that simple. You would overthrow those passes too if you would start to become nervous that you were not going to be protected. What was it? 2 sacks in the first drive alone? Doesn't set a really good precedent. Corey says, I want to beat Georgia to keep them from winning the third natty. We all want that. We got much bigger issues than just trying to keep them from winning another natty. Our issues right now are about getting this team where it needs to be, as an offense especially, and getting the team healthy. WT says, I feel like this game brought some Auburn fans back to earth in expectations. I have been saying if we could win 8 games, it would be an amazing year. Tempered expectations for what was needed this year. I agree with that. I think there's always the hope out there with our history as Auburn fans that we could do a lot better. And sometimes we've been rewarded in that faith. Doesn't mean that it won't happen the rest of this season. But today was not a good precedent setter. You know, it'd be a much different story if I think if a lot of people had predicted that there would be a shootout, Auburn and Texas A&M, and Auburn just can't keep up. I think that was a little bit more of an acceptable scenario. But when your offense literally cannot get anything going, that's just hard to stomach and understand, given the context too that your head coach is an offensive minded guy. But again, it's simple as this: offensive line is where the problems began and ended today. It all flows from there. It's not only their fault. They're not the only ones that made mistakes today, but it's where the game is won. It's as simple as that. It's why there's so much responsibility placed on their shoulders. It's why they don't get half the praise they deserve when they do things right, but it becomes very, very evident of how much of an effect they have on the game in games like this. Vision Gaming says 7-5 still on the table. I had Auburn losing this game before the season started. All good, year one. 7-5 is still on the table. 8-4, which I would still predict. I have as my prediction. I'll have to think about if I should knock that down a peg after this game, but I think it's still too early to make big overarching assessments of this team. And, you know, I know a lot of people are saying, well, I can't take away what I saw on the field. Well, I can't either, but I'm still willing to give this team and coaches time to get things figured out. All right, let's keep some final comments and questions and derogatory rebuttals going. If you got any of those, drop them in here now. We have talked about defensive stats. We have talked about passing, receiving, and rushing stats, even though that they were not great. Took a hats off to Texas A&M, especially Max Johnson, for coming in and just showing out as the backup quarterback for Texas A&M. They got better in my eyes once he came in, which is interesting. So that's a good thing there. We gave kudos and hats off to Eugene Asante, to Alec McPherson, to Oscar Chapman, to Larry Nixon, to Brian Battie. So even amongst a game where there is not much at all to be super excited about, we found some players that really did have really great effort and some stats that they personally should be proud of, just not as a team. When it all amounts down to things here. As a reminder, what we got coming up next for you guys, join us tomorrow evening at 9 Eastern. Episode 51 should finally happen of the Auburn Experience podcast. We talk about sports culture. We have got a lot to catch up on as we have just had life getting away the last 2 weeks. We anticipate to be back in the saddle. Austin and I talking with you, a lot to discuss and break down about this football team over the last 3 weeks. So join us for that live if you can. You can obviously catch the replay, but it's more fun live. We even get to talk with you guys a little bit before and after. As always, check out those links in the description for ways that you can support us here, help be part of our little family that keeps the lights on by being a channel member down below on YouTube. Hit the join button. $1 a month is all it takes. Get some perks for yourself that way. Much appreciated for those of you that are able to do that. You can support us by just being here, smashing the like button, and being a part of what we do here and the content that we're putting out. So thank you for those that are able to do that. Take a few more comments and questions here. When I watched Sean Jackson run, I missed the formation from the 80s where we had a tailback and a fullback. Gone are the days of that, Kevlar, the glory days of the just straight I formations and just running it down someone's throat. I love having Sean Jackson in our backfield because he is underappreciated and underthought of and underutilized in some ways, but we've got great group of running backs that deserve their time as well. But every time you love a story of a walk-on who earns a scholarship, who comes in and every chance he gets makes the most of it. That's all you can ask for. Yeah, I think it's a good point, WT. Too many fans thought we'd be playing the same team as last year. Texas A&M is vastly different, vastly improved. I would disagree with you a little bit there, WT. I am still not convinced that they are as improved as we think they are. I would say that they are better than this team this year, and the context with which Auburn and Texas A&M found themselves last year was much more in the favor of Auburn. Probably don't win that game at Kyle Field last year. If we were at home for this one, I'm not convinced that this wouldn't have been a little bit more promising, especially with our crowd in it. My uncle's here. Good to see you. Let's see what he says. With all due respect to our offensive coordinator, we brought Coach Freeze to Auburn because of his team, particularly offensive success in previous schools, but we are seeing his usual team success without the usual coaching approach. Just my simple thought. Let me make sure I understand the comment there. We brought Coach Freeze to Auburn because of his team, particularly offense success in previous schools, but we are seeing his usual team success without the usual coaching approach. I don't know that I understand that fully, Kenneth, but I will say time will tell. It's a little bit early to make, as I've been saying for a lot of people, big overarching statements quite yet. But it is very discouraging what we saw today. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's anything else you guys want to address. I like Holden in the last few minutes. Maybe try him a few more possessions. Seems like he trusts the receivers more than Thorne. Well, he also wasn't getting the same pass rush that Thorne and Robbie were getting at that point in the game. My opinion. Doesn't that say it's right? I'd love to see if Holden's the best option for us, put him out there. But I kind of agree with what someone said earlier. I'm kind of not liking the switching back and forth outside of certain contexts. In this game particularly, I said that I was fine with Robbie coming into the game, given the fact that there was no time for a quarterback to set their feet, throw, and trust their receivers, but to try to just survive in that collapsing pocket. So if he's the best option for us, I say put him out there and let's give someone the confidence they need that we're going to ride with them and figure this thing out. And it kind of felt like that's the way we were heading with Peyton in the last game, and much different story today. A little bit of Again, context is the big word that's missing in a lot of our discussions about all this. So with that being said, we're going to put a little pin in the book of this therapy session. It was not a fun one. I'm sure not a fun one to talk about, but I appreciate you all being here and hanging out. Even if we disagree on the things that we're seeing and feeling, I continue to stress to all of you, take a deep breath, saddle up. It's a very young season. We'll see what happens. We're back home against Georgia next week and lots to talk about in the lead up to that. It's going to be a fun weekend on the Plains, no matter the outcome, because it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger, no matter what. Until I talk to you again, War Eagle.